Because watches are so small, having the right tool for the job is extremely important. Without the right tool for the job, I would just be sitting here damaging watches or damaging components because I'd be handling them improperly. So all of the tools that I have collected and continue to use are essential to me being able to work and perform the daily tasks that I need to perform as a watchmaker. Having been watchmaking for many years now, I've learned that inspecting tools is extremely important. You may receive a tool secondhand, either by purchasing it or being given a tool, but if that tool has been used improperly, it could actually do more harm to the work you're doing than good. You will leave a trace that you have worked on this watch. And over the hundreds of years that that mechanical watch might be around and be serviced and handed down from generation to generation, other watchmakers will see that mark that you left on a screw. And they will say, someone unskilled has worked on this watch, right? And that's the last thing any watchmaker wants to leave, right? We want to leave no trace. The watchmaker's bench is extremely important to every individual watchmaker. What we put in the drawers, it's unique to ourselves, our own style, where we want things to be located. The first thing you see at a watchmaker's bench is that it's very tall. It's counter height because we're going to sit at a low chair to focus on something very close to our eyes. Some of the tools that are the most used tools in a watchmaker's bench would be tweezers, and those come in all different shapes and sizes, all different materials, some with different tips. And then you'll have your screwdrivers. Those are the most often used tools in the watchmaker's bench. One thing I learned early on as a watchmaker is that one of the most important tools I use is light. Being able to inspect a part for flatness and perfection, whatever that is, right? Whether that's having a perfect 90-degree angle or having a perfectly flat part or a decoration like Geneva stripes, perfectly flawless. The only way to truly inspect these things is with light. So utilizing light at the watchmaker's workbench is essential. And that's something that over time you learn exactly how to inspect tools and parts for flaws. As a watchmaker, we are always inspecting. Even a brand new dial or wheel could have a flaw from manufacturing. In traditional watchmaking, we want everything to be as beautiful and as perfect as possible. Every watchmaker has a different way of organizing their bench and different tools that they prefer to use for different tasks. In a watchmaker's workbench, they'll typically have 10 pairs of tweezers, and usually you'll have at least 2 full sets of screwdrivers because everything is going to be tuned to a certain part of what the watchmaker does. Every screwdriver will start as a standard screwdriver, and then the blade itself will be shaped for a particular screw that the watchmaker is working on. So I have 2 sets of screwdrivers on this bench, and I have 2 more sets of screwdrivers on another bench. The screwdriver blades will be a certain size, but we will hand file them so that the point is a certain width, depending on what screw we're working on. These 2 screwdrivers are the same screwdriver until I hand file them for different screws. That's why I need 2 of them. And I even have other ones for backup in case I need to make a blade just for one particular screw. Very few of the tools that we use as watchmakers are made and finished from a manufacturer. They usually are delivered to us in a state that is really kind of unusable, and everything needs to be fine-tuned to the level of perfection that that particular watchmaker wants to work at. And that really depends on what kind of watches you're working on. During those inspections of all of the parts of the watches and the tools, we use the watchmaker's loop. And I have a drawer in my bench that is full of loops. Some are multiples, but there are certain loops that are for inspection, and they might be 20 times magnification or 10 times magnification. And then you have other loops like this one that are designed for working, meaning we're a little further back from the movement or the part we're working on so that we can actually hold a tool in front of our face as we're focusing on what we're doing. Those loops could be a 2.5, meaning a working distance of 2.5 inches, or a 1.5. You'll also have the tools that you work with most often will be placed around you so that you don't even have to lift your head. You start to know where you keep your tools, so you can be working and grab certain tools without having to even look up from what you're doing. We have these armrests, which are a luxury, really. My first watchmaking bench did not have armrests. That's something that will make the life of the watchmaker much easier, because we do oftentimes have our arms up as we're working. We want to have a nice place to rest them so that we don't have our hands going numb all the time. On a well-equipped watchmaking workbench, you'll also have compressed air and vacuum. The vacuum is for picking up any kind of dust or debris, and the compressed air would be to blow dust off of a part. Besides those, you'll also have oilers, and those are used for placing oil right where you want the oil to be on a clean movement during assembly. When you start to think about watchmakers' tools, the reason we have so many tools is because everything has a very specific task that it's been designed for. And as a watchmaker, we don't use our hands to touch parts. So everything we use is an extension of our hands. And what that allows us to do is have very specialized tools. And those tools are all hand operated, but they can interact with the parts in a perfect way. Instead of us fumbling around with our large fingertips that are covered in body oils and trying to work on anything, you'll never see a watchmaker touching watch parts without finger cots on. And even with finger cots on, you shouldn't be touching the parts. You should always be touching a part with a tool and holding the tool in your hands. Every watch movement is slightly different. So there are some tools like this that are movement holders, and they hold different size movements while hands are being placed on top, or they need to be fit into a certain press. These will help hold the movement in place. There are other types of movement holders that are designed more for the assembly of the movement and will fit many different movements, and they're more of a Weiss style instead of something that is rigid like this that only fits one diameter. You'll also have different tools for pulling cannon pinions and pulling hands off of watches, many different styles of pliers, some for cutting, some for pulling, some just for clamping. One thing that's absolutely essential on every watchmaker's bench is a cloche like this, in order to keep dust from settling on watch movements or watch parts while you're working on a watch. An open watch is exposed. It's like performing heart surgery. Everything needs to be sterile and clean, and you wouldn't want to just do that in an open atmosphere and then just leave a watch sitting open like that for dust to settle onto the vital organs inside. So we cover everything whenever we stop working on something or have another task we need to do. We always cover the watch. A watchmaker's bench is kind of like a fingerprint. It is very unique to the watchmaker that works at that bench. You'll find some similarities going from one watchmaker's bench to the next, but you will also find some very unique tools and methods that have been developed by that watchmaker over their years working. We always want a watch, when it's being inspected, to look as though none of the components have ever been touched before. Everything should be flawless. There should be no marks on screw heads. There should be no damage to bridges. You should not see anything that looks like somebody has worked on this watch before. It should look like the parts just appeared there and put themselves together with nobody touching them. That is ideal. So every tool we use has to be perfect. From when you first put a watch on your workbench, the goal as a watchmaker is to leave no trace. Every watch that goes onto the watchmaker's workbench should be set down on the workbench in near perfect condition, and it should always leave the watchmaker's workbench in condition better than it arrived.